What's the best order to read the Narnia Chronicles in? Oh, this is a big debate. This is a huge debate. And I'm going to tell you the real order, the final, definitive, real answer on how we should read the Narnian Chronicles. And this is a huge debate because, frankly, the British order and the American order are simply different. The way that they're published is different, and so it's really important to kind of think this through, and I'm probably not teaching the class in the order of the books that you have. So, growing up, even though I didn't grow up in the United States, I had the American order, and this has sort of been pilfered by my son, so some of these are missing, but it begins with The Magician's Nephew, and it runs all the way to The Last Battle. And in all the orders, The Last Battle is the last book. And this is the American edition as you would see it. And I've got here in the brackets here, not the date of publication, but the date of the worlds that they're a part of. So Magician's Nephew is year 1. I don't know, maybe it should be year 0. I don't know how those things work. And it begins in 1900 in Earth time. So year 1 in Narnia time and 1900 in Earth time. And then we have Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which happens in 1940 in Earth time, and the books run to like 1949. So they cover about a decade in Earth time. And the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe covers what Lewis thought was a 15-year span between the year 1000 and 1015, and then we have The Horse and His Boy, which happens near the end of that reign in 1014, and then but occurs for the children in the same year. Prince Caspian's 1,000 or so years later, 2290 to 2304, but happens just a year later for the children in England. Again, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is just the next summer in England, but it happens 2306. So what's that? 16. Just a couple of years actually after The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Happens just after Prince Caspian in that world. That doesn't sound quite right, but anyway, this is how it was put out by Lewis in a note that he made at one point. And captured in this book by Walter Hooper called Past Watchful Dragons, which also has some like extra stuff on Eustace's diary and some neat things. One we'll take a look at near the end of the Narnia section. And then we have The Silver Chair, which is 2356 in Narnian time in 1942 in English time. And then the only post-war book is 1949, The Last Battle, which is 2555. And so Narnia ends on the 2555th year. Okay. So there we go. So that's basically the order that you've been given the books in, probably. I don't know if you got them on Kindle or Kobo. I don't know. It might be different, or Nook Book, or however you read books these days. And you may just happen to have a British edition or some other edition kind of kicking around. If you are a foreign language student or you're taking this class online and not living in the United States, I assume that you either have the American order or the British order. Okay, well, what makes this order problematic? Okay, because I'm saying it's partly problematic, right? Well, the big thing is this, right? In Chapter 7 of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which you already hopefully have dug into, it says the beavers say the name of Aslan, and then it says none of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. But of course, if they had just read The Magician's Nephew, then they knew who Aslan is. Aslan's the singer, creator of the world. Aslan sets up the redemption space for this world, and Aslan's a healer and a namer and all kinds of things, right? So, and Aslan tells them what the first joke looks like in their world. So Aslan, we know Aslan. Actually, Aslan is as featured in The Magician's Nephew as in any other book, and maybe more on a per space volume than anything else. So it doesn't make any sense coming into The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it says at the very end, the very last sentence of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and this won't destroy the story for you if you're not quite done, and that is the very end of the adventure of the wardrobe. But if the professor was right, it was only the beginning of the adventures of Narnia. Okay, well, it's not the beginning, right? I mean, if you read The Magician's Nephew first, then this isn't the beginning. And I probably did read The Magician's Nephew first. It was one of the books that struck me most. But, there we are. And then we have Prince Caspian, which is the return to Narnia. Well, this is sort of anticlimactic if it's the fourth book, as it would be in this series, right? Prince Caspian, The Return to Narnia. Well, they've returned to Narnia twice already. You know what I mean? So it doesn't kind of make sense. And there's, Narnia nerds have created all kinds of lists for this kind of thing. If you want to go online, you'll find all kinds of furious debate over the order. You should know almost nobody in the scholarly world thinks that reading them in this order is a good idea. Everybody, all C.S. Lewis scholars almost think this is the right order. And this is the order that I've set up the class. So maybe that tells you something about my prejudices. Beginning with Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, then Prince Caspian, which is subtitled The Return to Narnia. And then we have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader and The Silver Chair, two children's adventure stories, travelogue stories. And then we have the fifth one, The Court Tale, The Horse and His Boy. And really these two could kind of be put in different orders, but we'll see in a minute why maybe that doesn't work. And then The Magician's Nephew as the prequel to Narnia, second last before the last battle comes out. Yeah, so this has the logic of discovery is what I call it within the books. So each time you come to a point where one of the other books is referenced, it makes sense in this order. This is the publication order. This is what Lewis decided to put out in a certain order, and it does lack a narrative logic. I mean, obviously putting the prequel, the creation story, right before the apocalypse, the last story, is kind of weird. But that's just how it was. The reality is there's actually a third list, and almost nobody talks about this list. But this is the list in which Lewis completed the books. Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe went through iterations, finishes 1948, I believe 1949. And then we have Prince Caspian in 49, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader in 50, The Horse and His Boy in 50, and The Silver Chair in 51. And we see that these stories came really quickly. Once Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe came in, Prince Caspian popped out as a second story. Then Voyage of the Dawn Treader and The Horse and His Boy came really quickly on the heels of one another. Then it was a year or so, and The Silver Chair was complete. Then it was a couple of years. Lewis went on sabbatical in 1952, 1953, and was working on academic work. And The Last Battle actually comes out. The Apocalypse actually comes out of that academic work. And then finally, The Magician's Nephew, which was begun in 1948 and 49 at the same time, and maybe one of the first Narnian tales, takes the longest to finish, and Lewis struggles with it the most. But then, again, this is one of the arguments for reading things in the publication order, not in the internal chronology, because in the end, this is how Lewis chose to put the books out, even though he could have changed the order in several cases. So, and it's not like there's a complete lack of narrative chronology. It's just that this follows the discovery logic, is what I call it. I think that's a fancy sounding name, don't you? All right. Okay, well, what did Lewis think about this? This is controversial too, because the reality is this next part was used for the American chronology. I think I agree with your internal chronology, Lewis writes to a young Lawrence Krigg, which you can get his letter in the Letters to Children edition. All the letters I'm referencing today are in Letters to Children. I agree with your internal chronology order for reading the books more than with your mother's published order. Lawrence had read the books, asked the author, what order should I read the books in? And Lewis wrote a quick, very short letter. You've got the whole letter on your screen, except for, obviously, the hello and goodbye. And he has a prejudice for the internal logic order, which is really interesting. I think that's worth considering. However, I'm not sure it's wise. So the American edition, actually, if you look, you'll see they've published on their website, and in some of your editions, it says that C.S. Lewis preferred the internal order of this book. And so that's why we published it this way. And this is what Walter Hooper has pushed, Lewis's literary secretary. And Hooper has claimed that Lewis asked him to write down the books in these order before he died. And there's some people that are anxious about that as testimony. But let's actually press in a little bit on Lewis's own letter. But, that's me saying but, not Lewis. The series was not planned beforehand, Lewis continues to write, as she, your mother, thinks. When I wrote The Lion, I did not know I was going to write any more. And then I wrote Prince Caspian as a sequel, and I still didn't think there would be any more. And when I had done The Voyage, I felt pretty sure that would be the last. But then I found I was wrong, so perhaps it does not matter very much in which order anyone reads them. I'm not even sure that all the others were written in the same order in which they were published. They weren't. I never keep notes of that sort of thing, and I never remember dates. Fortunately, we do. Scholars have worked this out, and so that's why we know this particular order. Okay, interesting. Well, let's actually look at some of the weaknesses with the internal chronology approach using this letter and some of our own logic, right? None of the first generation of readers would have been able to read them in published order. 1956 was the earliest that they were all available, and it would have been quite a while before you could gather them all up unless you were hunting for these, unless you were haunting your local bookseller. And in the United States, imagine how long it took to get out of, get them across the ocean, out of Macmillan's office in New York, and out across the land in the America in 1956. And so it would have been a while. So it's really a decade probably, or 15 years before most people could have read them in the first order, and certainly no one in the first generation read them that way. So certainly not a necessary order. Lewis seems to recommend internal chronology, but honestly can't remember how he wrote them. We know that he made choices to put them in a certain order. He just has forgotten. Lewis admits it probably doesn't matter what order they read them in. I mean, this is much softer than the assertion by the publisher that, they have to be in a certain order. Well, I don't know. Probably I haven't checked, but probably there's a Scholastic edition, and probably the Scholastic edition follows the American order too. It looks like Lawrence has already read the books once, so we have to remember that Lewis is writing to somebody who has already knows. He's already discovered Aslan. He's already tumbled into that world through the imaginative wardrobe of reading. So his answer is going to be different, quite frankly. That's something to consider. And this is going to be controversial. I understand people are going to send me hate mail and all kinds of firebombs will start, but of course, we're doing online discussion, so that's probably a good thing, isn't it? Why would Lewis be the best person to tell us in what order they should be read? I mean, he's not a reader of Narnia in the way that we're a reader. In fact, he's already discovered all the stories in the voice of the narrator and then chronicles them for us. He's not a reader in that sense. He's not a discoverer in the same way. And then there's something Lewis couldn't have considered. Does a generation that has seen the movies, or maybe the earlier BBC things, have they seen the movies first? Once they've seen them, do they read that differently then? So once they've discovered Aslan on screen, is there a certain way that we should read these things? So those are some questions. Of course, I've already suggested there's a discovery logic problem to the internal chronology. So those are the weaknesses with the internal chronology approach. Let's look at some alternatives. Okay, now first, I'm going to go crazy. Okay, one, shouldn't it be the case that we read The Horse and the Boy during the final chapter of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe? Okay, you'll come to this chapter, they're speaking in kind of court language, and there's all these adventures, and one of those adventures in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is The Horse and His Boy. You should read those two books at the same moment. You should read into the last chapter of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, set it down, read The Horse and His Boy, finish it up, and then go back to the end of the book, the first book. Okay, and then what stories did Puddlegum tell while they were walking with the children towards the giant city? Or even, the horses as they're moving back to Narnia and The Horse and His Boy. But thinking about Silverchair and Puddlegum, perhaps Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and the Voyage Dod Treader should all be read during Chapter 6 of Silverchair. So you're right, you read the first 5 chapters and the introduction to Chapter 6, set that book down, read the other 3 books in order, or in any order you want. We would know, and then pick up and finish the Silver Chair. Well, certainly Horse and His Boy should be read during Chapter 3 of the Silver Chair, where the blind poet comes out in the castle of the king, who has just departed on a voyage, and they hear a court's tale from a blind poet, and it's the court's tale of the Horse and His Boy. And this is one of the discovery logic points. Take a look at that passage in Chapter 3, and it says, the narrator, Lewis, says, well, I'm not going to tell you the whole story right now, but it's called The Horse and His Boy. Well, if you've just read it, you don't need to be told, right? And then, really, couldn't we read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe in Chapter 6 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, just as the newly undragoned Eustace and the redeemed Edmund are sitting in twilight hearing Eustace's story? Interesting. And then we're going to hint at there's a moment in the last battle where all the stories could be retold, or some of the stories could be retold, depending how you want to do it. So those are some weird ways to read, but not terribly practical. But if you're reading multiple books at multiple times, then that might work. So some things. Well, here's some other alternative approaches. Number one, have Narnia read to you in the published order, either with mugs of hot chocolate beside a warm fire or on a warm lap, or in the crook of a parent's arm in bed before the light goes out. I mean, that's ideal reading of Narnia, isn't it? Isn't that a great way to do it the first time? Well, it didn't happen with me. It may not have happened with you. It happened with my son, and we'll see how he grows up. He could become a felon, who knows, right? So I don't know if it'll always work, but it's not all is lost if you didn't get that experience. You could explore Narnia yourself, going in the published order as you seal in the characters and the story, and you can see my preference for the published order here. Then try reading Narnia according to internal chronology, and you can see the whole world differently. Find old attic and yard sale copies and steal copies from people, or get them from the library and keep them in your backpack or the backseat of the car, or in a big old jacket. Up where I live, we have winter, and so we need jackets with big pockets to keep gloves in, so we can keep little books in there. These are great occasional adventures that you can read where you disappear for bits at a time, and they can be read in any order and at any time. And of course, they may never get done. My son found an old Horse and His Boy copy. I probably should make sure it's like not a first edition or something dumb, and that he's walking around with a $300 book or something. And he just keeps it, and he just throws it in bags when he travels. He's never actually gotten to it. I think he's been toting it around for 3 years. He's read it in order, at bedtime reading, but he's never actually gotten to it. Number 5, convince your parents or your traveling buddies that the unabridged Narnia makes a good travel soundtrack. I think we may do this as a family next year. Horse and His Boy and Silver Chair are especially good travel stories because they're travel stories, and so is Voyage of the Dawn Treader. A little more liquid, a little more boat-like, but there we are. And I'm actually on an island, and our school's on an island, so I don't know how much you can listen on your commute to the school if you come across a bridge, but Voyage of the Dawn Treader is probably a good over-the-water kind of a story, isn't it? You could listen to the Focus on the Family dramatizations. They're actually pretty good, and they capture almost all the dialogue that's actually in the books, plus some description. They're like an abridged version, but they're about as long, so they're kind of interesting. I listened to them once a few years ago. I'll probably never listen to them again, but they are intriguing. And then they're very American, and that's not an insult, but it should be noted that the accents are all British, but the feeling of them is an American ethic rather than a British one, or a Hungarian one. They don't feel Hungarian at all. Okay, you can watch. What about the films? You can watch that hilarious BBC production where basically a combination of like costumes and Muppets is used to kind of do the story. Painful and interesting. In kind of a I don't love the Lucy character, but give that a try. And then you can watch the large, exciting Hollywood blockbuster films that are super poorly made. You could watch those, and that's another way of rereading. And the Silver Chair should be out next year. I think probably winter, like January, February of 2019 is my guess. And you can read them in the order that Lewis wrote them. Okay, so that's a separate one. So read them just as he wrote them. And I would suggest you read them along with his letters, which you can usually get now, by the way. You can usually find them on sale from time to time for between $1.99 and $9.99 on Kindle. The third edition of his letters, this is my copy here. It's kind of thick and big. It's 1,800 pages or something. Is over $1,000, I think, on Amazon to buy a paper copy. So it's probably the most valuable thing in my house is probably that letter edition, which is a little sad, isn't it? So you can read them along with Surprised by Joy and the letters of the period, and kind of read them integrated into Lewis's life. Well, that's an idea. Find Hooper's past Watchful Dragons, and then read some of the bits that Lewis wrote that didn't get in. This is a fun way to reread Narnia, by the way. I don't know if this book's still in print. The Past Watchful Dragons. Here's a couple of the copies. I got mine used, I think, for like $4 plus shipping on Amazon, but your library may even have one. And then finally, when the time has come, do one of the following. Read Narnia in the published order with your child in the crook of the arm in bed just before the light goes out. Or with your niece and nephew, right? Or your grandchildren, or your neighbor's kids, or some Sunday school kids, or whomever with mugs of hot chocolate beside a warm fire. So that's a great way to read those. It takes a while, by the way. I don't know how long it would take. 3 or 4 hours a book. So probably you shouldn't do it all in one day, all 7 books. And then find someone else to read Narnia to in the published order. This might include after-school clubs or reading clubs or school classes or children's hospitals or library groups or the digital friends you've collected over the decades or I don't know. You probably, get a cease and desist order, but you can put on like a tweed jacket and get a pipe and sit beside a fire and read them to the internet. Who knows? Okay, so, and of course you could write your own. Now this is a weird way to reread, is to write them, but boy, I talk about getting into the world. Lewis actually encouraged it to Jonathan Mule. I have no idea how to say that name. Why don't you try writing some Narnian tales? I began to, because everybody kept writing, when are we going to get more Narnian tales, Mr. Lewis? I began to write when I was about your age, and it was the greatest fun. Do try. And what Lewis wrote when he was his age was the Boxen Tales. And then Lewis to Denise Howe's a year later, and why not write stories for yourself to fill in the gaps in Narnian history? I've left plenty of hints for you, especially where Jill Pole and the unicorn are talking. Okay, and so this is in the last battle. It says, this is nice, said Jill to the Jewel the unicorn, just walking along like this. I wish there could be more of this sort of adventure. It's a pity there's always so much happening in Narnia. But the unicorn explained to her that she was quite mistaken. And then we have this really cool paragraph that I'll look at in the last battle lecture, where he kind of retells a bunch of the stories in hyper short form. So there's a whole outline of stories for people to write their own Narnian tales. You should know that if you publish this in the United States, you will get a cease and desist order from Macmillan Publishing Company or one of the others. So, HarperCollins. I guess Collins actually owns everything now. So I would encourage you not to do that. Some have. A nun wrote a 8th Narnian Chronicles about Susan, and it was rejected by the Lewis Company, the literary publishers. And there were some others. Neil Gaiman has written a story on Susan, and there's at least one other story on Susan. But of course, he's a super big guy, and it was just a short story, so he didn't get in trouble, perhaps. But you can do this. This is another way of rereading the Narnians, Narnian Chronicles, is just to create some. Okay, so here we are. We're at the end of the lecture. What is the real order to read Narnia? Okay, is it like right up here? Is it the British order at the top right of your screen? Is it the American order on the bottom left of your screen? I found some Narnian nerd has basically kind of created a chart for you. What is the real order? Are you ready? This is it. You're going to hear it. The best way to read Narnia is to reread Narnia. That's right. You heard me. This is the real order of Narnia, is to read it again and again and again. It's actually better as an adult book than it is as a kid's book. I mean, don't keep it from kids, but boy, as adults, we've encountered the world and we've had to make harder choices, and wrong and right don't look so clearly as they do, and we need to be remembered how to fight dragons in fairy tales and how not to become dragons in real life. I mean, these books are great as adults, and then as we grow as adults, if your education was as poor as mine growing up, then you're missing a bunch, but eventually you're going to read Milton's Paradise Lost, and then the Narnian Chronicles come alive in a new way. You're going to read Dante's Comedy, and then the Narnian Chronicles come alive in a wrong way. You're going to read the Bible more and more. You're going to read Homer. You're going to read Virgil. All these books that fill in the background of the Narnian Chronicles. Even Sherlock is mentioned in these books. These books are hugely about books from other books, and so that doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean. They're rich in other kinds of books seeping in, and each one of those that you gather into your heart, into your the wardrobe that you keep of your own literature inside of you, that's going to enrich your reading. And so the best way to read Narnia is to reread Narnia. I know. Okay, I know. I understand that's cheating. I understand that I promised you something and didn't deliver, but I thought this is more fun, and I don't really care that much about controversy, to be fair. And I had to pick an order for class, and so I picked the order in which they were published, and I think it makes good discovery logic sense. About half of you will have read Narnia and remember them. About half of you won't, and this will be your first time reading them, or the first time reading them and remembering them because you were too young the first time. And so really it matters to me most what you actually think. And so we'll return to this question at the end of the last Narnian discussion and just see what you think, whether you read them with me in the right order, or whether your kid's version was best and the American version's best, or some other order that you've thought of that I just didn't. Well, I hope you enjoy, and I look forward to talking to you online.